The CNN studio lights burned bright, casting sharp shadows across the stage. Rows of cameras zoomed in, ready to broadcast every word to millions of Americans glued to their screens. The air inside was thick with anticipation. Two figures had drawn the nation's attention for one reason. Tonight, Governor Greg Abbott and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would face off live. Abbott sat in his wheelchair at center stage, his expression calm, collected, a picture of composure. Dressed in a tailored gray suit, he exuded confidence, his posture relaxed but firm, his eyes steady on the crowd before him. To his supporters, he was Texas grit incarnate, measured, unshakable, and always ready to defend his people. Across from him, AOC radiated intensity. Clad in her signature bold red blazer, her dark eyes flashed under the studio lights. Her energy was unmistakable, her voice sharp and magnetic, every word designed to pierce through the noise and ignite her base. She was ready for a fight, and everyone in the room knew it. The moderator's voice broke the silence. Good evening, America. Tonight, we bring you a critical debate between two of the nation's most outspoken leaders. On one side, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. On the other, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Tonight's focus, leadership, vision, and the future of our country. The crowd applauded, but there was tension in the claps, a split audience, half cheering, half bracing for the clash. AOC wasted no time. Leaning forward, her voice cut sharp and clear. Governor Abbott likes to call himself a leader. But what kind of leader lets his state suffer from failing power grids, from poverty, from outdated ideas that hurt families instead of lifting them up? Leadership isn't about clinging to the past, it's about building the future. And frankly, Governor, your so-called calm is just another word for inaction. The jab landed, drawing loud cheers from her supporters. Abbott remained still, his face unreadable, his hands folded neatly on the table. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion, but his eyes stayed fixed on her, quiet, steady, calculating. Then Abbott finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate, carrying the weight of a seasoned fighter who'd been here before. Congresswoman, it's one thing to speak with passion. It's another to govern with results. And tonight, I think America deserves to see the difference. The clash had begun. The audience leaned forward as the first exchange ended. The tension was palpable, hanging heavy in the room like a storm waiting to break. AOC smirked, clearly satisfied with her opening blow, while Abbott remained still, unshaken, his composure almost unnerving. The moderator quickly interjected. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you've raised questions about Governor Abbott's leadership in Texas. Governor, how do you respond to the claim that your calm demeanor is actually masking a failure to act? Abbott adjusted his microphone, his voice firm but even. Calm is not inaction. Calm is leadership under fire. Texans don't need theatrics, they need results. When our state faced historic challenges, hurricanes, pandemics, border crises, we didn't crumble. We responded. We rebuilt. And we stood strong. The crowd clapped, mostly from his side of the aisle, but it was clear the words resonated beyond partisanship. Abbott continued, leaning slightly forward now. The Congresswoman calls my style outdated. But I ask you, what's more outdated than a politician who thinks shouting louder means solving problems faster? The remark struck like a dart, drawing laughter and applause. Cameras caught AOC's eyes narrowing, her smirk fading just enough to show that the jab landed. She fired back quickly, her voice sharp, her hands cutting the air as she spoke. Governor, you love to brag about Texas resilience, but Texans paid the price for your failures. Families sat in freezing homes during the grid collapse. Children went hungry. And while you talk about calm, what they saw was indifference. Gasps rippled through the room, her supporters clapping, his bristling. Abbott's response came swiftly, his voice unwavering. And while you mocked us from Washington, Congresswoman, Texans rolled up their sleeves and fixed what needed fixing. That's the difference between speeches and solutions. The crowd roared, the energy now split down the middle, the studio charged with raw electricity. It was no longer just a debate, it was becoming a duel of identities, two Americas colliding under the glare of the cameras. The studio had transformed into a battleground. Every sentence now carried the weight of a punch, every reaction magnified by the cameras and the roar of the divided audience. AOC leaned forward, her tone sharper, almost daring Abbott to falter. "Governor, you talk about results, but the truth is your so-called calm has left Texans vulnerable. While you protect corporations and oil companies, families suffer. That's not leadership, that's neglect." Her words were met with loud applause from her supporters, who rose to their feet, chanting her name. The moderator raised a hand to restore order, but the energy was too raw to be contained. Abbott remained seated, unshaken. His expression was one of quiet defiance, as if her fire only made his calm shine brighter. He leaned toward the mic, his Texas drawl slow, deliberate. "Congresswoman, you confuse calm with weakness. But Texans know the truth. Calm is standing strong when the storms come. Calm is leading with facts, not fury. And let me remind you, while Washington elites were busy tweeting, Texas was keeping America's economy alive." The crowd exploded, his supporters shouting, "Abbott! Abbott," as his words reverberated through the hall. Even some undecided viewers watching at home could sense the contrast. Her passion against his steadiness, her fury clashing with his unshakable composure. AOC's jaw tightened. She snapped back quickly, "Governor, don't you dare pretend that calm excuses failure. The power grid collapse, the border chaos, the poverty in your state, these aren't storms from nature. These are storms from your policies." Abbott didn't flinch. Instead, he let the silence hang for a second, then delivered his counter like a blade sliding across steel. "Congresswoman, you mistake fury for effectiveness. Texans don't need noise. They need solutions. And Texas delivers while Washington only talks." The cheers erupted again, louder than before. The contrast was clear, and America was glued to every second. The studio felt like a powder keg ready to ignite. The audience hung on every word, divided but captivated. AOC leaned into the microphone, her voice rising, her tone dripping with disdain. "Governor Abbott wants to talk about calm? Calm didn't keep Texans warm when the power grid failed. Calm didn't put food on the table when families struggled with skyrocketing costs. Calm is just another word for doing nothing while people suffer." The words hit hard with her supporters, who erupted in applause and cheers. Some waved signs, their voices echoing through the studio, "Tell him, AOC." But Abbott remained composed, his face unshaken. He let the noise settle before speaking, his voice steady, deliberate, almost surgical. "Congresswoman, you confuse noise with progress. Texans don't need fiery speeches, they need real leadership. When disaster struck, we didn't wait for Washington handouts. Texans rebuilt, businesses reopened, and our economy led the nation in job growth. That's calm in action. That's results." The crowd roared again, louder this time, with chants of "Abbott! Abbott!" rippling across the room. Cameras zoomed in on AOC, her fiery expression hardening, her smirk replaced by a clenched jaw. Abbott leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "And let me be clear, calm doesn't mean silence. Calm means standing strong when others panic. It means delivering solutions when others just argue on Twitter. That's why Texas thrives, Congresswoman. Not because of fury, but because of focus." The audience erupted once more, the sound echoing off the studio walls. Abbott's words hung heavy in the air, his calm presence overwhelming AOC's fiery energy. It was no longer just a debate, it was a collision of two worldviews, and Abbott's steady resolve was starting to outshine AOC's unrelenting fury. The studio audience was no longer just watching a debate, they were living it. The clash between Abbott's steady resolve and AOC's fiery passion had transformed the room into a live arena. Each statement landed like a blow, each pause like the inhale before the next strike. AOC stood tall, her hands gripping the edges of her podium. Her voice rang out, commanding attention. Governor Abbott talks about results, but let's remember whose results they are. Oil executives. Corporations. The wealthy few. Meanwhile, working families in Texas are freezing in the dark, struggling to make ends meet. Calm isn't leadership, it's abandonment. Her supporters leapt to their feet, their applause thunderous, their cheers echoing across the studio. Some chanted AOC. AOC, as cameras panned across their faces filled with admiration and rage. But then Abbott leaned slightly forward, his expression unchanging, his tone steady as stone. Congresswoman, you can keep shouting about slogans and sound bites. But Texans know better. They know that leadership is about protecting jobs, defending freedom, and making sure families can stand on their own feet. That's what Texas represents. And that's what your fury will never understand. The response was immediate. Half the room erupted with chants of Abbott. Abbott. Their voices louder, longer, more relentless. For the first time, even some undecided audience members clapped along, drawn to Abbott's calm defiance against AOC's relentless fire. The moderator tried to step in, tapping his notes nervously, but the energy was too powerful to contain. The audience was no longer just divided, they were electrified. Abbott's calm had become not just his defense, but his weapon. And the longer he stayed composed, the more AOC's fury looked less like strength and more like desperation. The tension in the studio reached a fever pitch. AOC's fire had roused her supporters, but Abbott's calm resilience was beginning to shift the atmosphere. The audience was no longer just split, they were watching to see who could land the decisive blow. Abbott leaned in slightly, his voice steady, his delivery slow but deliberate, almost like a trial lawyer building his case. Congresswoman, you say I've abandoned Texans. But let's look at the facts. Texas is leading the nation in job creation. Businesses are flocking to our state because we defend freedom, not strangle it with regulation. Families move to Texas for opportunity, not despair. That's not abandonment, that's leadership. The crowd roared, Abbott's supporters chanting louder than before. Even some undecided voters in the room nodded, drawn to the force of his calm precision. Abbott paused, letting the cheers roll before continuing. You want to talk about suffering? Texans know hardship. We've faced hurricanes, blackouts, and economic challenges. But here's the difference, we don't wait for Washington to save us. We solve it ourselves. That's grit. That's Texas. And no amount of shouting can erase it. The camera panned to AOC. Her lips pressed tightly together, her hands gripping her podium as if she were holding back an eruption. Her fury, once a strength, now risked looking unhinged next to Abbott's composed authority. The audience clapped wildly, chanting Abbott. Abbott, as the governor leaned back, his calm smile saying what words could not, fury was no match for focus. The moderator tried to regain control, but the studio had already transformed into a stage of raw conviction. Abbott's calm strength was building momentum, and AOC, unwilling to yield, launched back with renewed fire. Governor, she snapped, her tone sharp as steel, you keep praising Texas, but let's be real. Texans froze in their homes when your grid collapsed. Texans pay the price for your refusal to modernize. And Texans struggle under policies that protect the wealthy while leaving working families behind. That's not leadership, it's negligence. Her words ignited cheers from her side of the crowd, her supporters chanting her name, some rising to their feet as if urging her to push harder. Abbott, however, didn't flinch. He leaned in, his voice calm, measured, the kind of delivery that cut through noise like a scalpel. Congresswoman, you can keep repeating the same attack lines, but Texans know the truth. When the grid faltered, we didn't fold. We fixed it. When families struggled, we didn't give excuses, we found solutions. That's the Texas spirit. We don't whine. We don't wait. We act. The audience erupted, Abbott supporters shouting, "Abbott! Abbott!" so loudly that the moderator's gavel-like attempts at control were drowned out. Abbott continued, his eyes narrowing just enough to show resolve. "You say my calm is negligence. But let me tell you what negligence looks like. It looks like mocking Texans from the safety of Washington instead of standing shoulder to shoulder with them in the storm. Texans don't need your outrage. They need results. And results are what I deliver." The roar that followed shook the studio, with chants of "Texas! Texas!" echoing through the hall. AOC's fire had once commanded the stage, but Abbott's calm had turned into a storm of its own, one that was sweeping the audience into his corner. The air in the studio had shifted. What started as AOC's fiery assault had turned into a test of endurance, and Abbott's calm was winning. The chants still echoed in waves, but now the undecided faces in the crowd leaned toward him, captivated by his steadiness. Abbott raised a hand, quieting the noise, and spoke with a conviction that filled the room. "Congresswoman, you've made it clear, you thrive on outrage. Outrage gets clicks. Outrage trends on Twitter. But Texans don't live on hashtags. They live in reality. And in reality, fury won't keep the lights on. Fury won't put food on the table. Fury won't defend our border, protect our freedoms, or rebuild a town after a hurricane. Calm will. Leadership will. That's the difference." The crowd exploded in applause, chants of "Abbott! Abbott!" rolling like thunder. For the first time, even the moderator struggled to hide a faint smile, sensing the undeniable shift in momentum. AOC leaned forward, her voice rising in defiance. "Governor, passion isn't the enemy, complacency is. America doesn't move forward with calm speeches and platitudes. It moves forward with urgency, with boldness, with people willing to fight." Her words drew cheers, but Abbott was ready. His voice, steady as ever, sliced through the noise. "Congresswoman, fighting is easy when all you do is talk. But true leadership isn't about fury, it's about focus. And focus is what Texas has shown the nation time and again. That's why, while Washington argues, Texas delivers." The studio erupted once again. For many, the debate story was already clear. Abbott's calm had not only survived AOC's fury, it had transformed it into his greatest weapon. The crowd's energy surged like a tidal wave, but Abbott remained the still point at the center. He didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned toward the microphone, his calm expression lit under the studio's bright lights. "Congresswoman," he began, his tone steady but firm, "you say urgency drives progress. But urgency without discipline is chaos. Fury without focus is noise. Texans don't want chaos, and they sure don't want noise. They want leaders who deliver, quietly, effectively, and without excuses." The audience hushed, then erupted in applause, their cheers filling the studio. Abbott's composure was not just surviving AOC's attacks, it was dominating them. He pressed on, his voice unwavering. "When you mocked Texans during our hardest times, we didn't crumble. We rebuilt. When Washington elites said we couldn't stand on our own, we proved them wrong. That's not complacency, Congresswoman. That's resilience. That's leadership. And that's Texas." The chants of "Texas! Texas! Texas!" rose again, the rhythm of the crowd shaking the stage. AOC sat back, her fiery eyes meeting Abbott's unshakable calm. For the first time, her fury seemed to waver, her passion meeting an immovable wall of composure. The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment, Abbott's steady resolve against AOC's fading fire. Commentators whispered in the press box, this was the turning point. Abbott didn't just defend himself, he defined himself. The battle was almost over, but Abbott had already claimed the high ground. The chants of Texas, Texas rolled like thunder across the studio, shaking the stage as if the walls themselves carried the rhythm. Abbott sat forward, calm as ever, letting the noise swell before lifting his hand. Almost instantly, the crowd settled into silence, a silence so sharp that every breath, every shuffle of paper from the press box, could be heard. Abbott's eyes locked on AOC, but his words were meant for every American watching at home. His tone was measured, each syllable deliberate, carrying the weight of a verdict. Congresswoman, tonight you came with fury. You came with fire. But fire without control burns down the very house it claims to protect. Texans don't want fury, they want strength. They want focus. And above all, they want results. That's why, no matter the storm, Texas stands tall. The audience erupted once more, this time united, the roar drowning out even the camera's clicks. Abbott continued, leaning closer to the mic, his Texas drawl cutting through the noise. You thought my calm was weakness. But tonight, America saw the truth, calm is power. Calm is leadership. And calm, real, steady, unshakable, will always outlast fury. The cheers shook the studio, some chanting his name, others simply standing in stunned silence. AOC sat rigid, her fiery expression dimmed, her earlier fury replaced by the realization that Abbott had flipped the narrative. What began as her attempt to expose him ended as a showcase of his resilience. As the moderator brought the debate to a close, cameras captured the defining image, Abbott composed, his hands folded neatly, the calm center of a storm he had mastered. The story that would ripple across headlines wasn't about AOC's fire, it was about Abbott's unbreakable calm, a moment that turned fury into his triumph. Tonight's debate proved something unforgettable. AOC brought fire, but Greg Abbott's calm didn't just withstand it, it transformed it into strength. While fury burned bright for a moment, Abbott's steady resolve showed the nation that true leadership isn't about shouting the loudest, it's about standing unshakable when the storm hits. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another showdown like this. We bring you the most powerful political clashes, where words become weapons and moments turn into history. Now, we want to hear from you. What did you think about Abbott's calm versus AOC's fury? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start the conversation.